Each night, footsteps stopped outside my door. "Stay still, it will be quick," he whispered. He wasn't a stranger, he was my father, and an old camera became the weapon I used to break free. The first thing you hear is the click. A shutter opening and closing, light captured in a fraction of a second. That is how I begin my days in this little corner of Querétaro, a town of cobbled streets and sun that drapes itself lazily across the hills. My name is María Teresa Ramírez. I am 68 years old, and I have spent most of my life behind a camera, observing, recording, trying to hold still the things others look away from. Hola, mis queridos. That is how I greet the women in my workshops, and it feels right to begin with you the same way. You should know this from the start. What I'm about to tell is not easy, but silence is far more dangerous than memory. Silence protects the aggressor. Words, even trembling ones, can protect the child. Here on the shelves around me are the objects of my present. Rows of books with spines softened by hands, framed photographs of women who once doubted they had strength, rolls of negatives that still carry the smell of chemicals. And on the desk, my old Kodak Retinette. It is no longer just a camera. It is my witness, my accomplice, sometimes even my shield. I call it La Memoria con Ojos. But before this quiet studio, before the tenderness of my grandchildren who dropped by on Sundays, before Querétaro became home, there was another house, one painted in fading blue wood, near the salty mouth of a river in Veracruz. That was the first place I called home. It had laughter, the smell of bread and milk in the morning, and shadows on the wall that my Tio would turn into rabbits and monsters for our amusement. For a time, that house was filled with music and the rustle of Mama's sewing machine. And then, slowly, terribly, it became something else. A house with doors that creaked open at night, with footsteps that made my blood turn to ice. A house where the person meant to protect us became the reason we stopped sleeping. You may wonder why I start here in the present with cameras and books and sunlight. It is because beginnings matter. You must see me now, whole, in order to understand the fractures that came before. What happened inside that blue house did not end me, though it nearly did. And what saved me, what always saved me, was the lens, the possibility of framing the truth even when nobody believed it. There was also the clavo, the nail, a small, ordinary thing of rusted metal that would change the story of my family forever. But I will not get ahead of myself. Every image has its composition. Every story needs its order. Let us step back together to Boca del Rio, Veracruz, where the river meets the sea and a little girl first opened her eyes to the world. I was born in 1952 in a modest wooden house painted the softest blue in Boca del Rio, Veracruz. That blue peeled under the salty breath of the sea winds, but to me it was the colour of safety, of mornings when the world still seemed simple. The windows rattled whenever the Gulf winds arrived, and through those same panes came the smell of wet earth after a storm. The yard was small, but we had a guava tree that crowned the patio. Its branches bent low under the weight of fruit when the season came, and my siblings and I competed fiercely to see who could gather the most. We were 4. I the eldest, then Gerardo, stubborn and brave, Claudia with her big curious eyes, and finally little Tadeo, born when I was already 9. Mama, whose name was Lourdes, but everyone called her simply Law, worked tirelessly as a seamstress. Her fingers carried the map of her labour, tiny scars from needles, rough skin from endless fabric. She sewed wedding dresses with lace, so delicate it seemed like mist, and at night I fell asleep to the rhythm of her machine. Tek, te tek, the sound of her devotion and exhaustion. Papa Ivan was a dock worker. He woke before dawn, disappearing into the mist of the port, and returned with the sun already falling. Sometimes weeks passed without him at home when the port was busy. Yet when he came back, he often brought something strange and marvellous, an exotic fruit from a faraway ship, a carved piece of wood from another land, even magazines with glossy photographs of places I had never dreamed existed. Those magazines became my first window to the vast world beyond Veracruz. Life was modest, but we were not unhappy then. Our days followed the rhythm of the seasons and the tide. We woke to the rooster's crow, drank coffee with fresh bread and warm milk left by the lechero at our door. We walked 5 blocks to the municipal school, my shoes polished black, my uniform starched so stiff by Mama that I walked like a soldier. On Saturdays, when the week's work was done, Papa would gather us and his fishing box, hooks, lines, bait, and lead us to the shore. There, with the horizon spread like an endless promise, I would lose myself staring at the place where the ocean swallowed the sky. Mama used to say I lived en las nubes, with my head in the clouds. She wasn't wrong. Even then, I was collecting moments, framing them silently in my mind, as if the world was a gallery and my eyes the first camera. At night, in the room I shared with Claudia, I made shadow theatre against the wall with the light of the oil lamp. My stories were always different from the fairy tales in books. In mine, the princess never waited for a prince. She found her own way out of the tower. Perhaps deep inside, I already knew I would need such strength. But my true initiation into the art of seeing came with a small box of cardboard given by Tio Juvenal, Mama's brother, who was an assistant to a photographer in town. It was a pinhole camera, homemade, with just a little hole that let the light in. "Look, Maria," he whispered, "the light enters and paints the world upside down inside this box." That magic was my first lesson. Light is truth, even when it arrives inverted. I had no way to reveal the images, it was too expensive, but that didn't matter. I began to frame everything with my hands, fingers forming a rectangle, capturing fragments of the world that belonged only to me. Those were still innocent days, though the horizon was already darkening. For now, Veracruz was my stage, the guava tree my kingdom, and light my secret companion. At school, I found refuge. I loved words, the cadence of Spanish, and the mysteries of science. My teacher, Doña Olga, noticed the hunger in my eyes and often lent me books filled with photographs of animals, plants, and even diagrams of the human body. She was the first to tell me, "A camera works like an eye, Maria. The lens is the pupil where light enters." It felt like a secret being revealed to me alone, but the quiet beauty of those lessons could not silence the storm that was brewing at home. Everything began to change when I was 12. First came the accident at the port. A cargo, poorly tied, slipped and crushed several men. Papa was lucky or unlucky, depending on how one looks at it. He suffered only cuts along his back, but it kept him at home for weeks, and his pay was reduced to nearly nothing. Money, which had always been tight, became a suffocating weight. Then came Mama's illness. At first, it was just headaches, constant but bearable. Soon, fainting spells followed. The local doctor dismissed her pain as nervios, prescribing her little white pills that dulled her but cured nothing. Her eyes sometimes glazed over in the middle of sewing, her stitches uneven. Brides stopped coming, orders slowed, and the little income she brought vanished. In those days, the air inside our house changed. Silence became heavy, like smoke that lingered. Papa began to drink more, not just the casual beer on weekends, but tequila, strong and bitter. He came home late, his eyes red, his mood black. The smallest thing ignited his fury. A misplaced shirt, soup not hot enough, the cry of little Tadeo. His voice, once just loud from the port, now tore through our walls like thunder. Mama tried to shield us, always. "Go to bed, niños," she whispered when the storm entered through the door. We obeyed, huddling together, listening to plates breaking, her sobs muffled, the crash of furniture. But walls do not block fear. Fear seeps into your chest, into your bones. One night, parched, I left the room quietly and found her on the kitchen floor, her cheek swollen, a thin line of blood at her lip. Papa was gone, probably drinking somewhere else. I helped her up, trembling. She forced a smile through her pain. "It was nothing, Hija. I tripped on the stove." But I was no longer a child who believed in fairy tales. I knew the truth. Sometimes the ones we love lie to protect us, and sometimes the truth must be seen to be believed. Soon after, she spoke to me while we washed clothes in the patio. Her voice was low, secretive. "Maria, you're becoming a señorita. Your body is changing, and you must be careful. Dress modestly. Never stay alone with men, even those you know." At the time, I didn't understand the fear behind her words. I only realized years later that she was trying, in her way, to warn me, but fate had already set its cruel rhythm. By the time I turned 13, the storm had become a permanent resident in our home. That birthday, under heavy rain, Mama made me a pastel de elote, though she was frail and pale. Papa, for once in good spirits, gifted me a red ribbon for my hair. He smiled as he said, "You're becoming a beautiful woman." His gaze lingered a moment too long. I didn't yet understand the weight of that look, but Mama did. She quickly changed the subject. Her eyes clouded with fear. It was the last birthday we spent together before everything collapsed. That same month, Mama's decline quickened. The headaches grew unbearable. She could no longer rise from bed without holding her head as though it would split apart. When she fainted in the kitchen, collapsing against the stove, our neighbour Doña Irma, an old nurse with eyes sharp as scalpels, came rushing over. After only a few minutes at Mama's side, her verdict was firm. Esto no son nervios. This is something far more serious. She must go to the hospital immediately. Papa resisted. Hospitals meant money. Money we did not have. But Doña Irma, with the authority of a woman who had seen death too often, wouldn't take no for an answer. She hailed a taxi with her own pesos and placed Mama inside. I will never forget her face as the door closed, pale, fragile, but still trying to smile at us, as if to assure us she would return. The truth hit us in the hospital corridors. After a battery of tests, the doctor removed his glasses, rubbed his temples, and said the words that still echo in my memory: a tumour, advanced. We must operate immediately. The chances are small. I was only 13, yet in that sterile room I felt the air collapse. Papa stood motionless, his fists clenched, his jaw trembling. Then, without a word, he walked out. That night he drank until his body surrendered on the kitchen floor, and the next morning he left for work, as if nothing had happened. From then on, the house became my responsibility. I was no longer Maria, the daughter. I was Maria, the caretaker. At dawn, I woke Gerardo, only 11, to help with chores. Claudia, barely 8, became my second shadow, tending to little Tadeo, who at 6 did not understand why Mama wasn't home. His constant questions stabbed me daily. When will Mama come back? I had no answer, so I lied. Soon, mi cielo. She's resting. Our days blurred into a rhythm of survival. I swept floors, boiled beans, washed clothes until my fingers cracked. At night, exhausted, I tucked my siblings into bed, and then came the part of the day I dreaded most, the moment Papa returned. He arrived unsteady, eyes glazed, breath thick with tequila. I learned to read his footsteps, the heavy stumble, the uneven drag, the way the latch rattled louder when he was drunk. Those sounds told me what kind of night awaited us. One evening I rose for water and found Mama's absence embodied in the emptiness of her sewing chair. The room felt colder without the hum of her machine. As I stood there, Papa appeared in the doorway, swaying. He called my name softly, almost tenderly, but there was something in his tone that made my stomach turn. He asked me to follow him to the bathroom, claiming he'd been cut at work. There was no cut, only the trap of a man whose grief had soured into something monstrous. That night was the beginning of a silence I would carry like a stone inside me. After that night, nothing was ever the same. The house, once filled with the clatter of Mama's sewing machine and the laughter of children chasing each other through the patio, became a labyrinth of silence and fear. Papa's drinking deepened, and so did the darkness that followed him home. Each evening I waited like a prisoner, listening for the jailer's steps. The sound of his boots dragging along the corridor was enough to turn my blood to ice. Some nights he would pass my door and stumble straight into his own room. Other nights, the footsteps slowed, stopped, and lingered outside. In those moments, I pressed my face into the pillow, held my breath, and prayed he would turn away. But prayers are not always answered. He would push open the door, and in the shadows, the ritual unfolded. Always the same hushed command whispered into my ear, as if rehearsed 1,000 times. Quédate quieta, será rápido. Stay still, it will be quick. It was never quick. It was endless. My body became a shell, an object. But my mind learned to flee. I stared at the cracks in the ceiling, at the shadowy stains on the wall, at anything that could take me away from the present. One mark of dampness above the bed resembled a continent. South America, perhaps. And I floated over it, imagining myself flying far away to a place where the sea met the horizon, where no one could touch me. In the daylight, life wore a mask. Papa acted as though nothing had happened, complaining about the cost of tortillas, scolding Gerardo for dirty shoes, pretending to be the hard-working widower burdened with 4 children. To the neighbours he was still Don Ivan, El Portuario, the man who brought home exotic fruits and magazines from distant lands. Nobody suspected the monster that lived behind our blue-painted walls. And I, his eldest daughter, played the role of dutiful housekeeper, the one who kept the children fed, the house swept, the family's fragile reputation intact. Nobody would believe otherwise. Who would listen to a girl of 13, especially against a man respected in the community? In the Veracruz of the 1960s, fathers were authority, almost sacred. A daughter's word carried the weight of a whisper against thunder. So I kept my silence. I carried the secret like a wound that refused to close. Each morning I braided Claudia's hair, helped Gerardo with sums, soothed Tadeo's tears, and forced myself to smile. But when the sun fell and the house slipped into darkness, I knew the corridor of shadows would again decide my fate. Every night I told myself, "Survive one more day, Maria." And somehow I did. It was during those years of torment that photography, once just a playful curiosity, transformed into something much deeper for me. At first it was no more than an escape, a way to look at the world differently, to frame beauty where I could not find it in life. But soon it became a weapon, a silent witness that could not be silenced. One afternoon, while rummaging through the belongings Tio Vanal had left behind before moving to Mexico City, I found it. An old Kodak camera, the kind with a heavy body and scratches that spoke of long journeys. It had no film, but the shutter still clicked, the lens still open to swallow light. I hid it beneath my mattress as though it were treasure, because to me it was. Whenever Papa left for the port or disappeared into the cantina, I pulled the Kodak out. I learned the way its gears turned, the way the aperture widened and closed like a breathing pupil. I practiced holding it steady, aiming it at the guava tree, at Claudia while she played, at the laundry swaying on the line. Click, 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 click. No images, no film, yet each press of the shutter felt like a small act of defiance, as if I were capturing proof that life still had moments worth preserving. I began to think of the camera as an ally, a companion that could never betray me. It taught me something essential, that truth can be framed, held, preserved. While my father's words tried to twist reality, while fear urged me into silence, the camera reminded me that truth was not just what he said, it was what could be seen, what could be shown. Books from the municipal library deepened my fascination. Señor Augusto, the bespectacled librarian with a voice like dry paper, noticed my endless borrowing of manuals on optics and photography. One day, after much hesitation, I confessed that I had a camera but no film. He disappeared into a back room and returned with 2 small, dust-covered rolls. "Old stock," he said, sliding them across the counter. "Maybe they still work. Use them well." I nearly wept at the gift. Those rolls felt heavier than gold. I didn't know then what I would capture, only that one day I might need them. And deep inside, a seed of resolve began to grow. If nobody believed words, perhaps images could speak louder. The old Kodak with its silent click became my secret confidante. While the nights belonged to terror, the days belonged to light. And light, I was learning, could carve truth out of shadows. The winter of 1966 brought with it not only cold winds, but the silence of a home losing its heart. Mama's illness, which had begun with fainting spells and headaches, tightened its grip like a shadow that no prayer could lift. The doctors spoke of a tumour, words heavy and foreign to our young ears, words that meant hospital corridors, white sheets, and the sound of her sewing machine falling silent forever. I still remember the day Papa stumbled home after hearing the news. He drank until the night swallowed him whole. Neighbours said he wept like a widower before she had even passed, clutching a bottle instead of her hand. They pitied him. They said, "Pobre Ivan, so much love for his wife." If only they had known what his love looked like behind closed doors. When Mama finally slipped away that winter, I felt the earth tilt beneath me. Her absence left more than grief. It left us defenceless. Even sick, even fragile, she had been a shield. Her voice, soft but firm, could still tame Papa's temper some nights. Without her, nothing stood between us and his storms. The neighbours came with flowers, with tamales and prayers, whispering that she was in a better place. But I could not stop thinking, what about us? Where was our better place? That night, I sat by the guava tree in the yard, staring at the darkened windows of our house, and realised the house itself seemed to mourn. The blue paint looked faded, the wood groaned in the wind, and the walls that had once cradled her laughter now absorbed the echoes of violence. Papada did not improve. Quite the opposite. He drank earlier, shouted louder, returned home sooner, sometimes before the sun was even gone. The smell of alcohol became the perfume of our nights, and the clinking of his belt against the chair was a warning bell none of us could ignore. I thought often of leaving. At night, while holding Claudia close as she cried into my shoulder, or when I bandaged a cut on Gerardo's face after he had tried to stand between Papa and me, I thought of running away. But where? Veracruz was a city full of eyes, but not all eyes saw. Many turned away from the bruises, from the silences, from the way I walked with my head down. The world outside whispered condolences for the widow, but no one suspected what was happening inside the widow's house. And I was just a girl of 14, trapped between childhood and womanhood, between silence and survival. That winter marked more than the loss of Mama. It marked the loss of whatever innocence remained. The house without her became a battlefield, and I knew, though I did not yet know how, that if salvation was to come, I would have to carve it out myself. After Mama's death, each day blurred into the next, like a photograph overexposed by too much light. Papa no longer held any disguise of dignity. The drink consumed him, and with it the last threads of restraint. He stopped working steadily at the port, taking only the occasional journal when desperation forced him. And when there was no money, he sold little pieces of our life. The radio that once carried boleros through our evenings, the clock that had ticked beside Mama's sewing machine, even her scissors, the ones worn down by decades of fabric and thread. I tried to hold the house together with my 14-year-old hands. I washed clothes for neighbours, stretched tortillas thinner, skipped meals so my brothers would not. Gerardo, barely 12, took odd jobs at the market, carrying crates of oranges for tips. Claudia became my shadow, eager to help, though still only a child herself. And little Tadeo? He asked every night when Mama would return, and I told him she had become a star. I pointed to the brightest one in the sky and whispered, "She's watching us." He believed me. Perhaps I believed myself. But it was Gerardo who began to resist. His shoulders were still narrow, his face still soft with boyhood, yet anger made him grow taller in front of Papa. When Claudia spilled milk one evening and Papa's hand rose in fury, Gerardo stepped between them. The blow landed on his own face, dropping him like a rag doll to the ground. I thought he was dead when he didn't move at first. That night I sat beside him until morning, watching his chest rise and fall, thinking, if Papa kills him, what will become of us all? It was around this time that I discovered Mama's secret. I had been cleaning Papa's room, always with a racing heart, fearing he might burst through the door at any moment, when I found a worn, leather-bound notebook hidden deep in a drawer. It was her handwriting, delicate and slanted, like stitches across the page. Her words were a mirror to my own fears. She wrote of Papa's temper, of the way his eyes lingered on me longer than they should. She never accused him directly, but in the silences between her sentences I heard everything. One entry read, "I worry what will happen when I am no longer here. I fear for Maria. I see the way he looks at her. I pray I am wrong, but my heart tells me otherwise." My hands trembled as I read. Tears stained the ink. It was as though she had reached out from beyond the grave to tell me, "You are not imagining this. You are not alone, and it is not your fault." That night when I heard his footsteps in the hall again, my fear shifted into something else. For the first time, anger burned hotter than terror. I pressed the diary to my chest like armour and swore to Mama's memory that I would not remain silent forever. The child inside me was gone. In her place stood a young woman, fragile but determined, who began to imagine an end to the nightmare, even if she did not yet know what shape that end would take. The months that followed Mama's death were the darkest of my existence. Our home, once softened by her presence, even in sickness became a tomb, each wall echoing with secrets it was forced to contain. Papa's drinking worsened, and his returns grew unpredictable. At night, my ears sharpened to the music of his footsteps. If they were firm and steady, I might sleep in relative peace. But if they dragged, heavy and staggered, I knew the terror would come. He would bang on my door, voice thick with liquor. "Open, Maria, or you'll regret it." And I, trembling, would obey to keep the little ones asleep. The nights became a ritual of silence and pain. By day, we acted like strangers. He was the grieving widower. the hard-working man who, to neighbours, carried the weight of 4 children on his shoulders. And I, the dutiful eldest daughter, quiet, obedient. No one could imagine what happened when the lamps dimmed. I withdrew more and more from the world. School became a fading dream. My books lay untouched, though they had once been treasures. My friends stopped knocking at the door. Shame sealed my lips, and I feared that anyone who looked too closely at me would see the invisible mark he had burned onto my skin. Yet amid this despair, I found an unlikely refuge. My Uncle Juvenal's old Kodak camera. It had been left behind when he moved to Mexico City, and I discovered it tucked in the back of a wardrobe, dusty but intact. It had no film, but it didn't matter. I cradled it like a lifeline. I began to practice in secret. In the daylight, when Papa was gone, I set it to my eye, framing the world between its edges. The peeling paint on the walls, Claudia's face half hidden in the curtain, Gerardo repairing a toy, Tadeo curled asleep in the hammock. Each click of the shutter, even without film, felt like a small act of defiance. As if by pretending to capture truth, I was reclaiming some power over the lies that smothered us. Sometimes I imagined what it would mean to photograph the nights, to let the lens reveal what words could not. But even in my fantasy, I doubted who would ever look at such photographs, who would believe a child against her father. And yet, the thought persisted. In the silence after he left my room, I would trace the outlines of the Kodak, imagining it as my shield, my witness. Perhaps I couldn't escape yet, but maybe one day this little box of glass and metal would speak when I could not. For the first time, resistance began to take root, small, fragile, like a seed planted in the darkness. But a seed nonetheless. Survival had become my daily occupation. With Papa losing his steady job at the port, money turned scarce like water in a drought. I, barely 14, began washing clothes for neighbours in exchange for coins or scraps of food. Gerardo, though only 12, carried baskets at the market for tips, his small body bent under burdens far too heavy for his age. Claudia, barely entering her girlhood, clung to me like a shadow, helping with chores. And Tadeo, our baby, still asked when Mama would come back. To him, death was too vast to understand. Often, when his eyes welled with tears, I would point to the sky and whisper, "Look, mi amor, see the brightest star? That's Mama watching us." He would fall asleep holding on to that image, while I lay awake listening for Papa's footsteps outside. But in that season of hunger and fear, a flicker of kindness found me in the least expected place, the municipal library. One afternoon, while hiding from the chaos of home, I wandered through its quiet aisles. My eyes fell upon a book about photography, its pages filled with diagrams of lenses, light, and the delicate alchemy of developing film. I devoured every word, each page a window into a world where truth could be captured and preserved. The librarian, Señor Augusto, noticed me. A thin man with spectacles that slid down his nose, he asked, "Do you like photography, Niña?" "Yes, sir," I admitted shyly. "I have a camera, but no film." He studied me for a moment, then smiled, as if recognizing the hunger in me wasn't only for food, but for knowledge, for expression. "Wait here," he said. He disappeared into a back room and returned with 2 dusty rolls. "These are old, but they may still work. They're yours." In that instant, he gave me more than film. He gave me possibility. I hid the rolls like treasure. At home, when Papa was gone, I loaded one into the Kodak. My hands shook as I followed the instructions I'd memorized from the library book. When I pressed the shutter this time, I wasn't just pretending. The world was finally being etched into light. I photographed the bruises on my arms, the chipped walls of our home, Claudia's sad eyes, Gerardo's clenched fists, little Tadeo's innocence still untouched by the shadows. For the first time, I wasn't only surviving, I was documenting, creating a record that could not be silenced. That night, as Papa's drunken voice thundered in the kitchen, I lay awake with the camera under my pillow. And for the first time, I dared to imagine that my suffering could have an end, that this fragile strip of film could one day become my weapon, my escape. The house, once warm with Mama's presence, had become a prison of shadows. Papa was no longer the father who brought exotic fruits from the port or laughed with us on the beach. He was now a storm contained in human form, striking at any hour, his moods as unpredictable as the sea in a hurricane. One afternoon, while cleaning his room, always with my heart racing, fearing he might burst in, I stumbled upon something buried deep in a drawer. It was a small notebook, the edges worn soft, the ink faded with time. Mamma's handwriting curved across the pages, delicate but firm. My hands trembled as I opened it. What I found there felt like hearing her voice again. She had written about her worries, her fears, about Papa's strange looks when he thought no one noticed. About me. Tengo miedo de lo que pueda pasar cuando ya no esté aquí, she had confessed months before her death. The words stabbed me, not because they revealed something new, but because they confirmed what I had buried in silence. Mama had known. She had seen the danger before I could name it. She had feared for me, for us. I pressed the notebook to my chest, tears wetting its fragile pages. For so long I had wondered if I was imagining things, if perhaps I was guilty of exaggerating, of misunderstanding. But her words were a lantern in the darkness, proof that I was not crazy, not at fault. That night, when Papa's footsteps echoed down the hallway, my body froze as it always did. I heard the pause outside my door, the slow turn of the handle, the familiar whisper that made my skin crawl. But this time, clutching Mama's diary under my pillow, something shifted in me. I was no longer only the frightened child. I was the daughter of a woman who had seen, who had left me a silent warning, almost a command. Survive. The pages became my shield. The ink, her last embrace. And while fear still gripped me, it now burned alongside something new, rage. For the first time, I began to believe that this story did not have to end in silence, that somewhere, hidden in the lines Mama had left behind, there might be a path to freedom. By the time I turned 15, my secret defiance had begun to take shape. The photographs hidden beneath the floorboards were my silent rebellion. But rebellion is never without risk. One evening, when Papa stumbled into the kitchen half-drunk, I dared to leave my camera on the table for a moment too long. He noticed. His eyes narrowed and he asked, "What do you need that thing for? Who are you showing pictures to?" His voice was low, dangerous, a snake coiling before the strike. I shrugged, feigning innocence, muttering something about practicing for school. He stared at me for a long time before slamming his fist on the table. "If you ever bring shame on this family, Nina, I'll make you regret it, and not just you, your brothers and sister too." From that night forward, his threats shifted. They were no longer just against me, they spread like poison to those I loved most. When Claudia spilled a glass of water, he hissed that accidents could cost her dearly. When Gerardo spoke back, he raised his hand high enough to make the boy flinch, then lowered it with a cruel laugh. "Not this time. But remember, I can." Even little Tadeo wasn't safe from his menacing words. It became clear, silence was no longer just about protecting myself, it was about shielding them. And the weight of that responsibility nearly crushed me. Yet the photographs gave me strength. Each time I developed a new image with Eduardo's quiet help, I felt less like a victim and more like a keeper of truth. Eduardo never asked questions, though his eyes often brimmed with unspoken worry when he handed me the envelopes. Perhaps he guessed more than I revealed. I also began to test the waters outside. When the school's social worker, Doña Eulalia, visited after noticing my absences, I almost told her everything. She sat with me in the empty classroom, her hands folded gently on the desk, her voice kind. "Maria, you can tell me if something is wrong at home." My lips parted. The words trembled on my tongue, but then I remembered Papa's hiss. "If you speak, they will pay." I swallowed the truth and forced a smile. "Nothing, Signora, we're fine." She looked unconvinced, but without proof, her visit ended with nothing more than a promise to check in again. I watched her walk away and felt both relief and despair. I had almost broken the silence, almost freed myself, but almost was not enough. At night, with Mama's diary in my lap and the camera under my pillow, I whispered to her memory, "I am trying. I swear I am trying." The net of his threats was tightening, but so was my resolve. I could not yet see how the story would end, but I knew this. One day, silence would no longer be my prison. The nights had become unbearable, each one a slow death. But in the quiet of the library, under the dim yellow lamps and the smell of old paper, I found something that gave me strength. Books about light, exposure, and the way images freeze time. Photography was no longer just a fascination, it rival. One afternoon, Signor Augusto, the librarian with spectacles forever slipping down his nose, noticed me hunched over a photography manual. His voice was soft but carried weight. "Do you like photography, Nina?" I nodded, hesitant. When I told him I had a camera but no film, he gave me something that felt like treasure. 2 rolls of expired film he had kept for years. "Maybe they still work," he said with a smile that carried no pity, only kindness. Those small cylinders of film became my secret weapon. I studied the mechanics of Tio Juvenal's old Kodak until I knew it better than my own hands. I hid it under loose floorboards, waiting. I no longer dreamed of princes or happy endings. I dreamed of proof of a moment when truth could no longer be denied. Meanwhile, Papa was unravelling further. The port had dismissed him for his absences and drunken outbursts. He returned home earlier, always with that heavy smell of alcohol, his rage boiling closer to the surface. The little money he earned unloading boats went straight into the cantina's till. Sometimes he sold what remained of our possessions, the radio, Mama's sewing machine, even the clock that once sang every hour like a bird. Each object that left our house felt like a piece of our past being erased. But the worst was not what he took, it was what he promised. One night, after Doña Eulalia, the school's social worker, visited us out of concern, Papa's mask cracked. He grabbed my arm so tightly that bruises bloomed the next day. "If you ever open that mouth," he hissed, "your brothers and sister will pay. Entiendes? No solo tú." His threat was more chilling than any beating. He knew exactly how to hold me captive, not with chains, but with love for my siblings. That night I sat awake, Mama's diary open on my lap, the rolls of film hidden in a tin box beside me. Fear and fury fought inside me. If I remained silent, the cycle would devour us all. If I acted, I'd lose everything. But Mama's words echoed like a drumbeat. "Tengo miedo de lo que pueda pasar cuando yo ya no esté aquí." She had seen this future. It was up to me to change it. For the first time, I whispered to myself in the darkness, "I will end this." Not as a prayer, but as a vow. The night of my decision, the camera no longer felt like an object. It pulsed like a living ally hidden beneath my mattress. I spent days preparing in secret. When Papa left for the cantina, I would rehearse the mechanics, winding the film, testing the shutter, finding the angles. Each click, even without film, felt like a rehearsal for a battle that would decide our lives. I had learned enough from books to know the power of images. A photograph does not argue. It does not stutter or tremble like a frightened girl's voice. It simply shows. And showing was the only way to shatter the fortress of silence he had built around us. So I waited. One Friday evening, Papa returned later than usual, stumbling through the house with the weight of tequila in his steps. I had already arranged the camera in the shadows of the armoire, angled toward the bed, a silent witness poised for truth. My siblings were safe for the night at Doña Soledad's house. An excuse about me being unwell was enough to send them away. My heart pounded so loud it seemed impossible he didn't hear it. Every nerve screamed for me to run, to hide. But I stayed still, my body frozen, yet my mind sharp, remembering each word from the photography manual. Hold steady, breathe slowly, wait for the light. When the inevitable began, I did not float away like before. I stayed present, my fingers brushing the hidden trigger. With a motion so small it was almost invisible, I pressed. The shutter whispered a click, muffled by cloth. He never noticed. When it was over and he staggered away, I lay staring at the ceiling, but something had shifted. For the first time, I was not just a victim. I was the keeper of evidence, the guardian of truth. My fear was still there, but it now carried a twin, power. Over the next weeks, I built a secret archive. I documented everything, his nightly intrusions, the bruises, the broken dishes, even the way his eyes burned with anger at the dinner table. Each roll of film became a confession written in light, a testimony no one could deny. Gerardo began to notice too. He was 12 now, no longer a boy who could be kept in the dark. One night he asked, "Why does Papa always call you? Why are you always so tired?" His voice trembled with suspicion, with the dawning of an awful truth. I turned away, unable to answer. Protecting him felt heavier than the bruises on my skin. But I knew the day was coming when I could no longer shield him or myself, and when that day arrived, the camera would be my only weapon. The envelope felt heavier than stone in my trembling hands. For days I had hidden the roll of film inside a tin can beneath loose floorboards, terrified someone might discover it. But photographs do not live until they are born onto paper, and for that I needed help. There was a boy at the photo shop downtown, Eduardo. He was a few years older, with kind eyes that lingered, not in the way of Papa, but in the way of someone who actually saw me. For weeks, I rehearsed what I might say. Finally, one morning, clutching the canister like a secret heartbeat, I stepped inside his shop. "I need these developed," I whispered, sliding the roll across the counter. Eduardo tilted his head, studying me. "It'll take a few days," he said gently. I hesitated, then added, They can't be seen by anyone else. Please." Something in my voice must have betrayed the urgency, the fear, because he didn't ask questions. He only nodded. "I'll do them myself. No one else will touch them." 3 days stretched like an eternity. When I returned, Eduardo handed me a sealed envelope, his gaze heavy with unspoken concern. "I didn't look," he murmured, "but whatever it is, I hope it helps you." I carried the envelope out into the plaza, sat on a cold stone bench and forced myself to open it. The images inside were sharp, undeniable. Papa's shadowed figure, the closeness, the act itself, captured with the stark cruelty of truth. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat, yet beneath the nausea a flicker of triumph burned. This was no longer just my memory, fragile and easy to dismiss. This was evidence. This was a weapon. I closed the envelope quickly, afraid even the pigeons in the square might see. The thought of showing them to anyone, police, neighbours, even Eduardo, terrified me. Who would believe a girl against her father, the respectable widower? And yet a seed had been planted. I no longer felt trapped in a nightmare that no one else could touch. I had proof. That night, as Papa stumbled home reeking of tequila, I hid the envelope beneath my pillow. His voice, his threats, even his touch, none of it carried the same absolute power anymore. I had taken something from him without him knowing. For the first time, it was he who was vulnerable. And as I lay awake, listening to his uneven breathing echo through the walls, I whispered to myself, "One day you will fall, and when you do, it will be by the truth you cannot hide." The storm outside raged like a mirror of my own heart. Rain pounded against the roof, thunder rolled through the Veracruz sky, and the house trembled with each flash of lightning. Inside, I was preparing for the confrontation I knew would come. My siblings were safely hidden at Doña Soledad's, their laughter muffled by distance. But I could still hear their echoes in my mind. For them, I had to be strong. On the kitchen table, in plain sight, I left the sealed envelope filled with photographs, my silent declaration. In my pocket, a small recorder borrowed from Eduardo, already holding my father's threats. And under my bed, my last line of defence. A piece of wood with a rusty clavo driven through it. It was crude, desperate, but so was my situation. When Papa stumbled in, soaked with drink and storm water, he saw the envelope almost immediately. His face darkened as he tore it open, flipping through the photographs with shaking hands. His eyes bulged, his lips curled. "You think this will save you?" he spat. "You think anyone will believe a whore's lies?" I stood my ground, though my knees quivered. "They will, because there are copies, and because I'm not afraid anymore." My voice cracked, but the words were true. He lunged, knocking over the chair, his fists clenched. The camera on the shelf crashed to the floor. I scrambled backward, my hands finding the wood under the bed. He roared, "You're mine! And if I go down, I'll take you all with me!" And then instinct took over. As he grabbed for me, I swung. The clavo bit into his temple with a sickening thud. His body collapsed, heavy and sudden, the smell of alcohol mixing with blood. For a moment, the world went silent. Only the storm continued outside, as if nothing had changed. He lay groaning, not dead but broken, his rage reduced to weak curses. I dropped the wood, shaking, my breath ragged. I ran to the phone, my fingers slipping on the dial. First the ambulance, then the police. My voice, once silenced for years, now poured out like a flood. The threats, the abuse, the photographs, the diary, the bruises, everything. When the officers arrived, I placed the envelope, the recorder, and Mama's diary into their hands. They did not dismiss me. They did not laugh. They listened. For the first time, the truth was heavier than his lies. That night, as Papa was carried out on a stretcher and my siblings returned home to find me trembling but alive, I realised the silence had finally shattered, not with a whisper, but with a strike, with light, with proof. The storm subsided by dawn, leaving the air fresh, the streets washed clean. I sat by the window, exhausted yet unbroken, watching the sky clear. And I whispered to Mama's memory, "It's over. We are free." Years have passed since that storm in Veracruz. The blue house of my childhood no longer stands. The sea winds and time have claimed it, as if the earth itself wished to erase those walls of silence. But memory, unlike wood or paint, does not rot, it stays. And I chose to give my memory a form, not of chains, but of light. Photography became not only my refuge, but my profession. With the help of Eduardo and the guidance of others who believed in me, I studied the craft seriously. I learned how to capture the world's raw edges and its tender moments, how to let a photograph speak louder than words ever could. Over the years, I filled galleries not with landscapes or portraits of celebrities, but with the faces of women who had also endured violence, who carried scars invisible and visible. Each image was a declaration. We exist. We survived. We are not silent. My siblings grew too, in freedom rather than fear. Gerardo became a teacher, determined to offer children the safety he once lacked. Claudia raised a family with laughter filling her kitchen, not screams. And Tadeo, always the youngest, found peace in music, his guitar echoing the lullabies Mama never had the chance to finish. As for Papa, he lived for some years after the trial, but he was never the same. The law, the shame, the injuries from that night all carved him down. I do not rejoice in his fall. I do not hate him anymore. Hate is another kind of chain, and I broke mine long ago. Now, in Querétaro, I sit on my terrace with a cup of coffee warming my hands, watching the Sierra glow under sunrise. My shelves are lined with cameras, old and new, each one a witness to my journey. On the walls hang photographs of my grandchildren, their eyes bright, their laughter frozen mid-burst. They know my story, not because I want to haunt them, but because silence is no inheritance. Memory, truth, and resilience. That is the legacy I pass down. Sometimes when I speak to groups of young women, I show them my oldest photograph, the blurred, grainy proof that once saved my life. They fall silent, their eyes wide. And then I tell them, you don't need a camera to find freedom. You only need the courage to name the truth, to trust that light will find you, even in the darkest night. I am no longer the girl trapped by footsteps in the hallway. I'm María Teresa Ramírez, photographer, mother, abuela. My life is not defined by what was done to me, but by what I chose to create after. Light, captured and shared, can outlive shadows, and that is how I know I am free.